Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you another drawing of these funny characters from the famous British sitcom Only Fools and Horses. Let's get to it. I'm going to be using a combination of tools here, mostly a black colored pencil and charcoal pencils. The size of the paper is 9 times 12 inches. It's 190 GSM Helios drawing paper. I'm going to start with a bit of vine charcoal to do this pillar or wall that they're hiding behind, and I'm going to show you my reference photo in the top right corner so that you can see what it originally looked like. I decided to leave out some of the background to create a vignette, but in order to draw this wall properly, and I had to include that wall. In order to draw that properly, I had to do a couple of things. First, I needed to stay consistent with the light source because the light is usually coming from above, so the lower part of each of these segments, which is facing away from the light source, needed to be darker. I also needed to create some clean edges using erasers and pencils. And of course I needed to create a sufficient amount of texture so that it actually looks like stone or concrete or whatever it is. Now, as for the drawing tools, here I'm going to be using a black colored pencil, a little bit more than usual. The black colored pencils I'm using here are Primo black colored pencils. That's the brand I have right now. As for the charcoal pencils, these are Worison woodless charcoal pencils, and in addition to them I also use vine charcoal. For this wall here I used mostly vine charcoal because it's a little bit lighter and it's easier to blend, and I wanted to create that type of slightly lighter surface, and I added some texture on top with a black colored pencil a bit later. I also added some details like some cracks and dents and things like that. So here I zoomed in a little bit, and by the way, if you want to examine the reference photo a little bit more, I'm going to put it in the description. Also, if you want to see longer videos and full-length videos, you can go check out my Patreon. Anyway, this is not the first drawing of the Only Fools and Characters I've done. I've already done a few of them. You can see them on my channel. I'm going to put the link in the description for that as well, and the links are also going to be in the end screen. And now I'm starting with the drawing of the characters. I'm first drawing Rodney, and of course these are Rodney, Del Boy and Uncle Albert. So I'm starting with Rodney, or Nicholas Lyndhurst. His hair is going to appear a lot darker at first because I used some medium charcoal to draw it initially, but that's because these shadow areas appear a lot darker at first. But once that area of darker value starts interacting with other areas of darker value, the hair is going to appear lighter. So once I actually shade the face and once I pull the highlights on the hair will appear a lot lighter because Rodney has light brown or maybe even blonde hair. I'm not really sure, but it's definitely lighter than it appears now. So initially I did a bit of work with a charcoal pencil, then I blended that with a tortillon and a brush, and then I did some refining with a pencil. And after that I pulled some highlights with a pencil eraser. The eraser and a pencil I'm using is a Koh-i-Noor eraser and a pencil, and in addition to that I also use a kneaded eraser, which is a Faber Castell kneaded eraser, but I mostly use that for cleaning up because it doesn't leave much residue. Sometimes I use it for drawing, but here I'm mostly going to be using that eraser in a pencil. So here, as you can see, I zoomed in a little bit so that you can see some of the details as I'm working on Rodney's face. And I'm mostly going to be doing this with a black color pencil. These black color pencils are very convenient when drawing details, because it's easier to sharpen them to a finer tip than charcoal pencils, and they produce cleaner lines and they don't leave any residue. So it's easier for me to work on these smaller details when working with black color pencils. But the disadvantage of the black color pencil is that it's not quite as dark as the charcoal pencil, and obviously you are going to need to have a range of value. Some of the details are simply going to have to be a little bit darker than the others. Now the problem is that because black color pencils are waxy, it's very difficult to work with charcoal over the black colored pencil, and it's usually better to work the other way around, to put down the charcoal first and then work with the black colored pencil. So that's one of the things that you need to keep in mind when combining these two types of media. And some artists also like to combine graphite with charcoal. I only use graphite pencils for sketching when working with charcoal. I rarely use them during the drawing process, maybe to shade some of the lighter areas, very, very light areas, but most of the time I tend to combine a black colored pencil with a charcoal pencil and vine charcoal, because I find that it just works better. Graphite is a little bit too reflective, and and it lubricates the surface a little bit too much, so it usually doesn't work that well with charcoal. Black color pencil does a better job at complementing charcoal, but like I said, there are some limitations there as well. Of course, you could do a drawing like this using nothing but charcoal. If you're a purist, you would have to use a harder charcoal pencil, and you would have to do much of the drawing process with a medium charcoal pencil. I do think that would be a little bit harder, and that some of the lines and some of the details would lack a little bit of precision. And another problem that you often have with charcoal is that because it's a lot darker, it's actually a little bit difficult to control the amount of value you're putting down. So you'll often find yourself taking away value rather than adding a value, which can be a difficult part of the drawing process, because you just finish one part of the face and then you feel like it's a little bit too dark and you need to take away a little bit of value, and then you shade the other part of the face, and then you find that maybe you shouldn't have taken away the value. So when you're working with something like a black colored pencil, it allows you to shade using a more traditional approach, just by either scribbling or using a tapered stroke, and basically building layers of value gradually by hatching and cross-hatching. And that gives you a little bit more control during the shading process. It kind of slows things down a little bit, but at the same time you don't have to correct some of the mistakes quite as often. So because these characters are from the TV series, I have to make sure that I get the likeness right, and obviously that's always a challenge when you have slightly smaller faces, or slightly smaller portraits. And like I said, the size of the paper here is 9 times 12 inches, and that doesn't really give you much room for mistake. So I have to be kind of careful as I lay down each and every one of those lines. With shading these larger areas, it's a little bit easier because you can always go back and fix them. But once I draw some of these darker lines, like for example around the eyes and the eyelids, it can be a little bit difficult to fix them later. because they are pretty difficult to erase, and that goes not only for the black colored pencil but also for the charcoal pencil as well. So this process is going to take a while. As you can see, I'm going to shape the face gradually, and the shape of the face will show up very gradually. Right now it kind of looks like a Rodney, but it's not quite there yet. It's going to take a while until I shade some of the areas, like for example the mouth and the forehead and the eye sockets properly, the areas in between the eyebrows and the nose. So those are some of the key areas when you're trying to achieve likeness, but it takes a while. When you're studying your reference photo, it takes a while for you to examine the photo, to understand the shape, and to put the right amount of value in each and every part of the face. They do have funny looking faces, and this was one of the best and one of the longest running and one of the most successful British sitcoms. I'm from Serbia, and this sitcom was especially popular in Serbia. It was immensely popular in my country. Maybe a lot of people found it easy to identify with some of the main characters and their careers, if you want to call them that, their daily struggles and things like that. So in this picture we have Uncle Albert, who joined the show a little bit later. During the first 3 seasons, I think it was 3 seasons or so, I'm not really sure. It was Granddad, and later in the show Granddad died, and he was replaced as one of the main characters or regular characters by Uncle Albert, his brother. Of course, the central character of the TV series is Del Boy, or Derek Trotter, and this is the character that I'm starting to work on now. He's wearing this thick, ostentatious fur coat and some rings and this cap. But as you can see, I first did a little bit of work around the head and around the hat to define some of the darker areas around it, and here I finally moved on to drawing the facial features. For some reason I always found Derek a little bit challenging to draw. I don't know, maybe it's his unusual face or smile. I have done several drawings of him. The first one I did was back in 2016, and I recently sold that piece, and there's an unusual story behind it, because when I moved into a new apartment in 2016, that was the first drawing I did in that apartment. It was the first drawing I finished in that apartment, and when I was moving out of it at the beginning of this month, or at the end of February, I think, I sold that very same drawing. So I sold the drawing that I created when I moved in, and I sold it when I was moving out of the apartment. And now I live in a house, and I've set up a nice little studio for me here, where I can do a little bit more work. in slightly better conditions. Not that the quality of my footage has improved much. Obviously, I'm still using the same old equipment because I'm cheap. But I think the camera still captures most of the details for those of you who are interested in my videos, and I hope that some of you will find this one entertaining or useful as well. I'm doing the drawing of Derek's face using a combination of black colored pencil and the charcoal powder that I'm kind of moving around, the charcoal dust that I'm moving around with brushes. So I used it to shade the darker side of his face, which is the left side or his right side, and I put a little bit more value there, and then I moved on to drawing some of the details like the eyes and the nose and the mouth and things like that. And now I'm going to be adding some more value and shading around some of these areas, because the thing is that if you want to draw realistic stuff, lines are not enough. A line has to mean something. You have to explain the shape, because in real life there are no lines, there are only shapes and lighting. So each line needs to mean something. You have to show what's casting a shadow onto what, and what the line means, what the shape is. And that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm trying to put a little bit of shadow on each or around each and every one of these lines, so that I can explain what they actually mean in the context of Derek's face, and so that I can explain the topography of Del Boy's face to the viewer. And like I said, I'm doing this with a black colored pencil. I picked up a slightly shorter bit now, but it's still getting the job done. For some of the larger areas, when I need to cover them quickly, I just use charcoal pencils or vine charcoal, and I spread that with a brush, because that's a very quick and convenient way for me to cover larger areas which need to be blended smoothly, because a black colored pencil really is not very good at that, because colored pencils in general don't blend at all unless you use solvents. And charcoal is quite the opposite. So when I have these larger, darker areas where I need to achieve some smooth transitions, I can just put down charcoal, and I use blending tools. So that's one of the reasons why I like to combine charcoal with black colored pencils. It's just a lot easier that way. You could do the entire drawing with a black colored pencil using nothing but a black colored pencil. I've done things like that many times in the past. I have a video on using nothing but a black colored pencil. I've done literally dozens of drawings in this technique. It can be done, but drawing larger, darker areas and smoother transitions between lighter and darker areas is a little bit more difficult, because you have to shade very patiently using cross-hatching and tapered stroke, and then blending that and pushing that as much as you can with brushes and Q-tips and things like that, because like I said, color pencils hardly blend at all. I've recently been experimenting with some other types of paper where you will find that colored pencils are a lot easier to move around. Like, for example, sandpaper. Sandpaper really grinds down on the colored pencils, and it allows you to move the pigment around a little bit more easily. But I find that for larger areas, for covering larger areas, pastel pencils are still vastly superior, and so is, of course, charcoal. Now I'm doing a little bit of refining using this pencil eraser, and I usually use it later when I want to put in some of these lighter areas, so that I can further emphasize the shape of the face. In order to show the shape of the face, you need a good range of value, and usually once I put down the darker areas and the midtones, I pull some highlights using a pencil eraser or a kneaded eraser. Another way you can do that is, of course, by reserving the white spaces, by not covering them with charcoal or pencil at all, and that's one of my favorite ways of creating highlights. But that's not always possible. Sometimes you just have to go back and define the highlights using erasers. Now I'm moving on to Uncle Albert. So you'll notice that each and every one of these characters has his own characteristic styling or types of clothes that they usually wear. Derek wears that cap and his fur coat. Rodney has that military style camouflage jacket. And Uncle Albert always wears that navy style cap, whatever it is. He has a huge white beard, and I'm going to be talking about how you can draw a beard like that. And he also has his old shaggy torn coat. And I'm doing a little bit of work on his facial features using a black colored pencil before I actually move on to shading the face and drawing the beard. I'm also putting down some of the darker areas around the cap here and drawing a little bit of shadow under the rim of it. I don't mind if I produce a rough texture here because I'm trying to make it look like it's made out of coarse material. Now I'm just going to cover the left side of the beard with a little bit of charcoal, using just the charcoal that was loaded onto the brush while blending. I'm going to make that a little bit darker before I move on with drawing the beard. And I'm going to draw the beard using this pointed stick. This is a technique that I've used many times in my videos. I simply create indentations using a pointed stick, and then once I go over these invisible lines with charcoal or with some other type of pencil, white lines start to appear. So that's a good thing. That's an easy way of drawing a white beard, but you actually have to create a lot of these scores, a lot of these small indentations in order to make the beard look thick. And later you can refine it a little bit using an eraser, but most of the work will be done if you've already created those indentations. So you can see that as I'm covering that with charcoal, some of the white lines are already starting to appear, and these don't have to be perfect. Because beards are like that, they're kind of messy and confusing, so just some suggestions of overlapping white lines will do the trick. But I had to put in a little bit of darker value first on that area to the left, because I wanted that to be in the shadow. If I immediately created those indentations, maybe they would end up being a little bit too light, and I wouldn't want that. Because even white beard, when it's in the shadow, is going to appear darker. So I needed to do that first. But I am going to be doing a little bit of refining with a pencil eraser a little bit later. Right now, I'm just focused on drawing the face, and I first did a little bit of work on these wrinkles around the eyes, but they kind of started disappearing on me once I started shading the face, because obviously I needed to make them a little bit darker. So I'm going to have to go back in and work around the eyes and put in those wrinkles back, so that I can kind of emphasize both the shape of his face but also his age, and give a more realistic look to his aging skin. So here, as you can see, I'm working on some details. I'm putting in some darker areas around the eyes and working on these wrinkles. I'm doing this with a black color pencil, which is, as I've already explained, what I normally use for refining some of the details, even when I'm working with charcoal. These Primo black colored pencils that I'm using right now, they're working pretty well. I like the fact that they are a little bit more massive and thicker, so they don't really break quite as often. But my favorite black colored pencils are definitely Faber Castells, either the Faber Castell Color Grip or the Faber Castell Polychromos. These are probably the best black colored pencils that I ever used, and I've done a ton of drawings with them. The beard is starting to take shape. Right now I'm kind of refining its edges a little bit, trying to make it look more irregular so that we have more of these flyaway hairs, and so that it looks more organic and natural. And I'm here moving on to his shirt or whatever it is that he's wearing. I need to create a sufficient amount of value under the mustache and under the beard, under the chin. Obviously that's going to be a large area of shadow. And this whatever it is, this scarf that he has a checkered pattern, so I put that in as well. I'm still refining the edges of the beard a little bit. I think the faces look pretty good. I'm not going to be doing too much to them right now, maybe just a few finishing touches a little bit later. This narrated video is a little bit shorter than some of the other ones. I used time-lapse a little bit more here because I didn't really want to create a very long video, and also I had to make it quite a bit shorter because the drawing process was almost 4 hours. I don't know if I'm going to be posting a full-length version of this one on Patreon, maybe if somebody requests it, but we'll see. Here I zoomed out a little bit, and now you can see what the whole drawing looks like. I'm working on some of the details around Del Boy's hand, and you can see a huge ring there. I'm going to try to create some suggestions of darker value around it so that it can stand out a little bit more, but there's not really much I can do on this size. I can just create some suggestions of details. I can't really give that much attention to each and every one, each single detail. All I have left to do is do a little bit more work on the texture of Uncle Albert's jacket, and of course the sleeves of, or rather the sleeve of Del Boy's fur coat. I'm just doing this with a medium charcoal pencil, and then I soften everything with a brush, and then I refine it with a black color pencil. And here I'm just refining some of the edges using a black color pencil, cleaning up the edges a little bit, trying to create a more finished look on my drawing, because initially it started out like a mess, like all of my drawings, and then later I somehow magically managed to make it work or clean things up a little bit, or at least most of the time I do. I think the characters turned out pretty good, and here I'm just putting down the finishing touches, even though I've already removed the tape and I sprayed the drawing with a fixative. I've signed the drawing in the lower right corner. I'm just going to do a little bit of work here and there, because sometimes I find it hard to put down the pencil, but the drawing is finished apart from these few last finishing touches. I hope you enjoyed this video and this slightly shorter video and this drawing process. I hope you found some of it useful or entertaining. Don't forget to check out my other videos. I have lots of other stuff, portraits, landscape, wildlife, all kinds of things. Don't forget to subscribe if you like my videos. Thank you for watching. I'm going to see you in the next one. That will be all, and bye for now.